All right, what we'll do now is run through a simplified version of our complete process. So that will be step one, build a model. Step two, unwrap the UV coordinates. And step three, create a texture or a surface material for the model from the UV coordinates. All right, and that's basically that process we'll use throughout the semester, although in more complicated form than this, which will be very simple. You will need 3ds Max and Photoshop to complete this tutorial. All right, so I'm in 3ds Max. Let's build our model first. It's just going to be a cube. So like I said, it's going to be simplified. First off, though, let's make sure we're all on the same page. Make sure we're using the same unit of measure. If I go to customize up here in the main menu and unit setup, not really sure what yours is going to read, but I'm just going to use generic units. Okay, it's not any real world measure. It's just like max units, and it's it used to always be the default. I'm not really sure if it will be your default or not, but anyway, and the whole thing altogether, it doesn't really matter what unit of measure you use, but everybody's will all come out the same if we use the same one. So anyway, generic units, okay. All right, let's create a box. I'm just going to go and start making a box here in my perspective viewport. Okay, just dragged a couple times, and then let's go to modify and make it 100 by 100 by 100. Hitting zoom extents all down here. All right, and I'm not sure if your length, width, and height segments might be something other than 1, but you want those all to be 1. Okay. Now, I don't believe we really need to convert this to an editable poly, but let's do it anyway because it's kind of going to be a routine. So I'm just going to go to select and move, so I'm not making boxes, and right-click on that, convert to editable poly. Okay, and then all my available controls are for editable objects rather than a parametric cube, right? And what we want to do here now, and what we will typically always do, is apply an unwrap UVW modifier. Okay, so we go to our modifier list right up here, right? And we go down to unwrap UVW. You can also just type in U to bring yourself down there. Unwrap UVW. Okay. All right. This we're gonna get to know quite well. Let's select all the sides first. So we're unwrapping. We're sure we're unwrapping the whole thing. And you can, when you're in unwrap UVW, and again, we'll go over this in greater detail later, you're in vertex mode, edge mode, or polygon mode, just like when you're in the editable poly, but it's different when it's in the unwrap UVW, okay? Now, one thing we want is this ignore back facing should not be turned on, okay? If it's on and I go and select all the faces, okay, and if you look at the back, you'll see that the back ones did not get selected, okay? So that's going to be on by default, I believe. You generally want that turned off, okay? So uncheck that, get all the sides, okay? And now let's open the UV editor. And this thing will open up. All right. And I'll show you guys in the future how to unwrap UV coordinates in a more custom or controlled way. We're just going to use an automatic unwrap here because it'll work on something simple like a cube. So if I go to mapping and then flatten mapping, okay, up here on the top, mapping, flatten mapping. Okay. And I'm just going to accept all the defaults here. And it gives me this, all right? So this area, what it did is it unwrapped. What you're doing when you're unwrapping UV coordinates is you're taking a volumetric 3D object and trying to flatten all its surfaces so you have a file that you can paint on, and that could later be wrapped back on the three-dimensional object. And so this is a cube, right? So it has 6 sides. And yours might come out diagonally, like this one here might be up there. It doesn't make any difference if it does. And they might have to do with slight differences in the size or something like that. I've had mine come out both ways without really doing anything particularly different. So anyway, and the idea here is to try to fill this square as much as possible with your UV coordinates, right? There's a lot of empty space on this one, but that's that's as good as you can make it. The side of the cube fill a square like this. So we'll just live with it. All right. So we unwrapped it. Okay. Now let's go to Tools in the main menu and Render UVW Template. Okay, this is the thing we're going to paint on top of in Photoshop. All right, so most of the stuff we can leave alone. The size of the document is going to make it 1024 by 1024. I think that's a little small, so let's make it 2048 by 2048. Okay. Generally, you use numbers that are powers of 2 here, like that. And the one thing I would do is the edges are going to be bright green, which, depending on what you're doing in Photoshop, it's better if the lines are white or black. So I'm just going to change that color there to white. Changing the green to white and Render UVW Template. Okay, so there it is. Now, it came out perfectly. It might look a little weird because those lines are maybe 1 pixel wide and they're probably narrower than the resolution of your monitor. But if you zoom in on it, you'll see that you know, the lines are all there. Okay, just might not show very well. All right, the thing rendered, right? But it didn't render to any file or any place. So we need to save it. So just click the little disk up here. And let me make a spot for this. Sorry, I didn't prep this in advance. 250. Okay. All right, so the save as type, let's make it a JPEG, okay? And the file name, you want to call this thing template, okay? We're going to be making all kinds of textures, you know, maps to put on your objects. And let's make sure that the template has always got a special or separate kind of name so you don't mix things up, right? The template is, it's really just like, you know, it just shows where the edges are of things. It's not the actual texture. When you export this thing to put it on your final object, you're usually going to have this layer turned off. It's just for positioning. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to call it templates, and it's a JPEG. Hit save, and you can have, you know, this thing dragged up to best, and okay. And I can close this thing now. And I think I can close the other stuff as well. All right, let's go to Photoshop and go to File, Open, and browse until you find your template that you just saved. All right. So what we want to do now is just paint something obvious on our Photoshop file so we can see that it works. All right, so let's make a new layer. All right, down in the bottom of your layer palette, okay, hit the new layer icon there, and let's get some bright color, right? And I'm going to type or write rather 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm staying away from the edges on this thing too. 5, 6. Okay. Now, so we painted numbers that should appear on each side of the cube, hopefully. I don't want to see this template. Now you can always move it up or down. If I were to double click on it, change it from the background layer to layer 0. Now I can move it up, okay? And if I make the blending mode screen, okay, then it's only going to show on the template what's lighter than what's below it. So I still see the lines, but I'm seeing through it to the red stuff. Or I can put this back down again, put that back to normal, okay? And I'm going to make another layer. This is probably a better idea. I'll make another layer on top of the background layer that'll fill with some other color, okay? So I'll hit the new layer icon now, and let's see here. I'm just going to change my paint color to something maybe like dark blue, and I'm going to say edit, fill. I'm going to fill it with the foreground color. Okay, all right. So however you do it, the main thing is we don't really want to see these lines, right? Because again, they're just the template. They shouldn't be on the actual finished file, all right? So let's say file save, and we can, so we don't want this to be called template anymore because it's more than a template, right? I'm going to call it cube texture or cube diffuse. It's the diffuse map. Okay, I'm going to say texture. I guess cube texture, and I'm just going to keep it a Photoshop document. All right, that's going to Photoshop actually works in 3ds Max of native Photoshop type. You just have to say, oh, do you want to use some particular layer or the whole thing flattened? The latter is what we're going to want. But anyway, okay, so we saved it as a Photoshop document, back to 3ds Max. Let's go to rendering, material editor, and compact material editor. Okay. And here, if I go rendering, render setup, let's have a look at this too. My renderer is Arnold at the moment. Yours may be as well. I'm just gonna, I think what we'll do is continue to stick with the scanline renderer to keep things simpler. Arnold would work fine too, it's just more complicated. So scanline renderer, okay. And I'm going to change one of these materials from physical material to, let's see here, scanline and standard legacy, okay. It's just gonna give me an old school regular material, all right? So all we have to do is go down to our maps area, okay? And this is the diffuse color is what we want. So click on no map next to diffuse and maps, and it's a bitmap, right? And we browse until we find the thing we just made. Let's see here. Cube texture.psd, open, collapse layers, not an individual layer. I want the whole thing. All right. and then making sure that you have your cube selected, right? You can assign material to selection, okay? And there it is, all right? If you don't see the numbers on there like that, it just means that this thing isn't turned on, okay? Mine is still showing it for whatever reason, but this right here is show map in viewport, whatever it's called. Show shaded material in viewport. Okay, so let's just render that out so we can prove we did it. This should be production rendering mode, scanline renderer. Let's make it 800 by 600 here. And let's direct it to a particular place so we can, so we don't have to, so it'll save when we render. So I'll go to files. Let's see here. And I'm going to render out a JPEG. Okay. And I'm going to call it cube rendering. Save. Okay. All right. Now just keep in mind it didn't actually render. We didn't ask it to render. We just told it where to go when it does render. So I think I did say I want 800 by 600, so it's reasonably sized. And let's hit render. Okay, and there it is. And that should be a JPEG saved on your disk. Hand that thing in. Okay, and that's our basic routine.